The evidence is clear. What our babies eat in the early years matters, from setting the healthy blueprint of the brain, body, and bones to eventually eating and liking nutritious foods. What our babies eat in early childhood is critically important. Today, I'm chatting with Kelly Hawthorne, a neonatal and pediatric dietitian. In this episode, we're going to be chatting about why nutrition matters so much for babies. We're going to talk about the nutrient-rich diet and establishing healthy eating patterns early on. We'll cover at-risk nutrients and how to close the nutrient gaps that some babies are experiencing. And we'll chat about the different feeding methods for infants and the importance of self-feeding. And last, we'll get into food innovations for babies. You're listening to the Nourish Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of raising healthy ones, inside and out. This, my friends, is episode number 121, and I'm your host, Jill Castle. As a pediatric dietitian, I know how important nutrients like iron and zinc are to the brain and overall early development of a child. Today's episode has been created in partnership with Beef, It's What's for Dinner, a contractor to the Beef Checkoff. For infants and young kids, iron and zinc have been identified as critically important in supporting proper growth and development. Beef supplies both, which helps ensure young children start life strong, building healthy bodies and brains. Cue the intro music.
Welcome to the Nourish Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of growing a healthy child. Here's your host, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert, Jill Castle.
Hey everyone, what's up? Thanks for joining me today. I hope you're all doing well. I'm so excited today to have Kelly Hawthorne on the show. She and I worked together not too long ago in August and in September, gather information and plan a conference sponsored by the National Cattlemen's Beef Association called Eating in the Early Years. And I'm bringing her on the show so we can share with you everything that we learned during this 4-day conference. The speakers on this conference were top-notch researchers, members of the Dietary Guidelines Committee, nutrition professionals, market analysts, innovation experts, and real parents. Kelly and I were facilitators, and I thought it would be a great idea to share the findings and information with you because it's cutting-edge stuff. It's the latest research. And the reality is, I believe you as a parent should know about this. And if you're a professional listening to this show, you definitely want to know about this. But before I introduce you to Kelly, I want to just give you an update on what's going on in the world of child nutrition. And specifically, since we're talking about infant nutrition today, I'm going to share an article that occurred in the Wall Street Journal just very recently called Do Babies Need to Eat Meat? So I looked specifically for nutrition news surrounding infants today. There's a lot out there, but I did want to highlight this particular article because the Dietary Guidelines Committee for 2020 has come up with recommendations for the birth through 24-month age child, which is brand new. We've never had guidelines from the Dietary Guidelines Committee around this age group of children. And it's very exciting. But of course, with all new recommendations, you're going to have people who are proponents of it and people who challenge it. But what is interesting in this article, and I'll include the link in the show notes, it'll be at www.jillcastle.com/121, 121 for episode number 121. The lead on the Dietary Guidelines Committee for this B to 24-month group, Catherine Dewey, she says in this article, quote, "A totally vegan diet at this age is really not going to meet nutrient needs unless you use a lot of fortified products." Also, another quote in this article from Steve Abrams, a professor of pediatrics at Dell Medical School at the University of Texas at Austin. He says, quote, also, as more mothers breastfeed and for longer periods of time, and babies consume less fortified infant cereals, the issues of iron and zinc deficiency have taken on more urgency. There were a lot of other well-known pediatricians quoted in this article. I think what I took away from it, and what I also took away from the 4-day conference we're about to talk with you about, is that breastfeeding rates have increased, which is wonderful. But there's also been an unintentional consequence to that, and that is that we're seeing an increase in iron and zinc deficiency rates amongst babies and young toddlers. So we'll get into that a little bit in this conference. Update on my end. Last week, I launched the ADHD Diet for Kids. It's my class for parents of children with ADHD. It focuses on food, so proper nutrition and feeding interactions, and troubleshooting the very most common nutrition challenges families experience in this realm. What makes this class unique is that I include a 4-week live office hour option with me. So I don't work one-to-one with clients anymore. So my solution to that, or my offering to you, if you do want to work personally with me, is to join my classes, the live versions of my classes, because I do hold the hands of my students as they move their way through my courses. And I provide, basically office hours where you can get clarity on what you're learning, ask questions about your specific child, and get some coaching around that. The class starts on the 26th. If you were not able to get in on the training and you are interested in joining this class, you probably could still get in as long as you get in before the 26th. So give me a ring if that's the case. Also, I'm done with the first edit of the Smart Mom's Guide to Healthy Snacking. Woohoo! If you want to join a group of reviewers and readers, which I'm calling Team Smart Mom, you can help me proof the book before it goes live. Send me an email if you're interested at jill@jillcastle.com. Let me know. What will happen is you'll get a complimentary PDF copy of the book, and you'll have about 2 to 3 weeks to look it over and provide any feedback to me. I appreciate these reviews because it really helps me pull out of the book, which when you're writing a book, you get really involved in it. It's hard to see any inaccuracies or typos and things of that nature. So as a reviewer, you will help me pick up those typos, those inaccuracies, and you'll help me pick up redundancies. All of these things are annoying to readers. I want to make sure my books are not annoying to readers. So if you want to be part of Team Smart Mom, send me an email and let me know. Well then, okay. So about my guest, Kelly Hawthorne, who I am so excited to introduce you to and have on this show. She's a registered dietitian and the director of clinical research for the Department of Pediatrics at the University of Texas at Austin, Dell Medical School. She trains physicians, dietitians, medical students, and undergraduate students in pediatric nutrition, clinical research study design, and healthy cooking techniques. Kelly's research focuses on neonatal and pediatric nutrition, including mineral absorption, intestinal failure, and human milk fortification for premature infants. She was honored with the Texas Distinguished Scientist Award from the Texas Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics and is a past recipient of the Emerging Dietetic Leader Award and the Recognized Young Dietitian of the Year. When Kelly is not in Austin, she can be found at her cattle ranch in Chalk Mountain, Texas. And if you follow her on Instagram, you'll see all the delicious victuals she is cooking up out there. So let's go ahead and get started with this show. Here's Kelly, and I can't resist saying this. Giddy up! Hello, Kelly, and welcome to the Nourish Child podcast.
Hey, Jill. It's so good to hear your voice.
Yeah, you too. We actually have had a lot of interaction over the last month or two together.
It's been fantastic.
Yes, I agree. So I am so glad you're here because I wanted to share with my audience this conference called Eating in the Early Years that you and I both participated in. And it was so full of juicy tidbits that I felt like, this information really needs to get out to parents. And so I thought you would be the perfect person to like co-saddle this show with me.
Yes, for sure. And for me attending kind of one of our first conferences that was all virtual in this day and age that we have right now, it was so much better than I had even thought it would be. And as you said, it was chock full of everything. And yet because it was kind of spread out, it wasn't too overwhelming. So it was fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. I couldn't imagine sitting for an entire day in front of a computer, but it was a great conference. And just for the listeners out there, it was a conference geared towards professionals and academics in the area of nutrition and childhood. So it was not geared towards parents, although I felt like there's just so much information that parents need to know from this conference. What do you think?
Oh, yeah, because every time we kept turning around, it was, okay, and now here's what you need to work with parents on. And now here's what you need to educate families that you work with on. So everything was so built from an evidence base straight into very practical methods that, we have to get this into parents' hands as fast as possible.
I agree. And just to even let listeners know who was there, we had researchers, we had members of the dietary guidelines committee, we had nutrition professionals, we had market analysts, innovation experts, and we even had some real parents in this conference. It was such a broad and deep dive into so many things that it was just fantastic.
Yeah, I loved it. I can't wait to talk about it.
I know. Okay, so let's start with like the overarching conference and your impression about the conference as a whole. And again, this topic for listeners, the topic is eating in the early years. So we are talking about birth through 24 months for the most part. So what topics or what was your overall impression?
So overall, like, as you said, it's the early years, it's that birth to 24 months, which really also encompasses another key term that floats around a lot is the first 1,000 days of life. And that's through pregnancy up to 2 years of life. And that's really such a critical window for a baby's development, and how nutrition is so integrally involved in that is just fascinating. And these are really, really moments in time in the baby's life when we can make an impact for lifelong outcomes. And a lot of that does come down to certain key nutrients. But, even as dietitians, we talk about nutrients a lot, but we don't eat nutrients. We eat foods, which is good because foods taste good, which is another part of what we're going to talk about today is the enjoyment of food and the funness that comes with that, and how foods are used for celebrations all the time. And that connects us to our babies that way too. But overall, how we can have the right nutrients in the right foods at the right times for these babies to really make an impact on their overall health.
That's right. Right. And it's not only just about the food. It's also, as you mentioned, there's also this whole element of teaching babies about food, teaching them how to eat, letting them have autonomy with feeding themselves. And as you mentioned, connecting through feeding is also a big topic that was covered. That whole relationship that you're establishing with your infant has an impression for their whole life, really. We got into that as well, which I thought I love that topic myself. I love the food and nutrients topic, but I really love the relationship stuff and the feeding stuff. Not going to lie.
Yeah, right? And that's the fun part. And, I am, pretty well versed with a lot of these subjects, but I have to tell you, Jill, that it was a light bulb moment for me to really understand that these babies, they have to learn how to eat. Like it's something that's so innate to us that we think, of course you just know how to chew. Of course you just know how to move things around in your mouth. Of course you know how to do all this. Oh, of course you must already have the muscle structure and strength in your cheeks and your lips to be able to drink from a cup. Like I'd never taken it down to that micro level to really understand what's actually happening with that baby. That was a light bulb for me.
Well, and I thought also the other topic that I was so glad that was covered was this whole establishing flavor preferences early in life, and how how that window, that first 1,000 days is so critical for establishing food preferences, from sweet foods to savory foods to, enjoying meats and vegetables and some of those foods that can be a little bit tougher for kids to enjoy if they don't get introduced to them early in life.
Right. And we've known for a long time, there's a lot of research looking at how even during pregnancy, the amniotic fluid can help taste preferences based on what the mom's diet during pregnancy is. And we know, of course, during what mom eats during breastfeeding, those flavors are helping to impact the baby. And so, of course, it just makes sense that all of those would continue on with the introduction of solids and having such a variety of foods to really make such a wider profile for the baby to have acceptance of those flavors.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And then I guess the other area of food innovation for infants. And if you're a parent out there, things are changing quickly in the area or in the arena of baby food. I mean, we've gone from glass jars to pouches and frozen cubes you can have delivered to your home. Like, the innovation in this area is just booming. And so we did have some innovation experts come out and talk, what is going on in the world of innovation, particularly around meats. And we'll dive into why this conference focused on beef in particular, because we're going to talk about the nutrient-rich diet and all of those things. But we did hear from experts in innovation around how we can make meats and beef in particular more accessible and appealing to families, because it is such a nutrient-rich item to offer an infant in those first 1,000 days.
Yeah, the innovations is very exciting to be thinking about. Pouches have kind of taken over the baby food aisle, and everywhere you turn is pouches. And so it was very interesting to hear what our experts in speech language pathology had to say about those pouches, and the best way to utilize those in a baby's diet. So really exciting stuff.
Yeah. All right. So let us jump into the first day. Now, remember, it's 4 days. So let's dive into each day and kind of go on a tour of this conference for our listeners and really kind of highlight all the different things that came out each day. So the first day, it really was focused on establishing why the early years are so important. And we heard from Dr. Bob Murray, and pipe in here because I might forget some of the actual presenters. We heard from Sharon Donovan from the Dietary Guidelines for Americans Committee. We heard from Dale Hayes. So what were some of the highlights for you on day one? Why are those early years so important?
I've done a lot of research looking into iron and iron in children. And for me, again, it does come back a little bit to that here at this time, we have the baby's stores from birth of iron are going down. They're kind of running out by about 6 months by what they were born with. And at that same time is when they're actually perfectly developmentally ready to start solids. And so the best way to do that is to introduce iron-rich foods to kind of build up those stores again and replace that and start fresh and keep going building iron stores. And the reason why iron is so important is because it is helping to make neuron connections in the brain. So these are things that are really only happening in this time period, in this first 1,000 days, and this birth to 24 months time period. And so it's the beginning of the brain development and such a rapid time of growth. And we know that the babies, they just grow so fast. They're doubling and tripling in size, and their head size is increasing so much. And you need all of that iron also for the blood supply to just keep up with that massive growth to support all of your body organs, everything that's growing. You need iron for that too. So for me, it really does come down to how this critical period is such a great opportunity to really support a child's growth, physical growth, and brain development.
Mm-hmm. Ditto on that. Yeah. And we also, I think that iron is oftentimes underplayed as a nutrient in this early time. I think that there's a lot of misconceptions about the adequacy of iron if you're breastfeeding in your breast milk. And it is very adequate in the first 6 months. But in addition to the iron requirement in a baby who's 6 months old, I mean, it's like a 10-fold increase in terms of the requirement at 6 months old versus birth. And we do have evidence that shows that iron in breast milk is decreasing at that time. And so you've got this picture of the iron from breast milk not being as high in breast milk as it was. And at the same time, that infant at 6 months, their iron requirements are going up quite a bit. So there's this huge potential for a gap.
Yeah, we know that kids this age, 6 to 12 months old, that we're talking about right here, that 1 in 5 of them don't get enough iron. And so it's really something that we know where iron is in foods and how to get it to babies. And so we really can do a much better job of making sure that every kid has enough iron.
Yeah. And so iron from animal protein sources, this was brought up in the first aid too, that, proteins from animal sources provide a lot of these critical nutrients. And it's not just iron, there's zinc, there's vitamin B12, which was also called out as very critical in this early phase of nutrition. And, animal sources of protein like meats, like beef, like dairy products can provide those nutrients that are just so important to brain development.
One of the things that I liked that one of the speakers, Erin Kwan, she talked about making every little bite count. And I thought that was such a great phrase because we know our babies, they have tiny little tummies. And, you can only get a certain amount of food in there at a certain time, So these gaps are really important for us to use very nutrient rich foods. And that's what we get with animal products, with a focus on beef, a focus on dairy products, and then also, a focus on great fruits and vegetables and whole grains. And, it kind of connects it back to the other things that happened on day one. We're really talking about a whole meal plan, a whole dietary pattern. Those are kind of phrases that we toss around in our industry, but it's just the entire way that the baby eats. It's taking it from specific nutrients, taking it into individual foods, and then beyond that, taking it into the variety of foods that a baby would eat throughout an entire day and how that balance comes across.
Yeah. And, fish and eggs too. And that just brings up, and I think we should touch on this because for a long time, fish and eggs were a no-no in the first year of life. They were seen as a food source of allergen. Now we know that it actually is desirable to introduce fish, egg, nuts, and other food allergens in the first year of life, somewhere between that 6 and 12 months of age range, depending on the developmental stage of your baby and how ready your baby is for trying these foods. But that it's a goal now to introduce those foods in that time frame, which is a huge change.
It's a 180 kind of change. It's a complete opposite kind of change. And, I think what the research is showing is that they're trying to, we saw like triple the rates of peanut allergies happening and realizing that what we had thought we were doing right before by delaying the introduction of those foods was actually setting these kids up for these poor allergies later. So the new recommendations are to introduce those foods, fish and eggs and dairy products and nuts, peanuts, all of those things, along with all of the other foods that you're introducing, like if you might be introducing rice cereal or oatmeal or, other kinds of, you've got your pureed pumpkin because it's fall time, and you've got different vegetables. Go ahead, like on the next meal, let's introduce a single serving of allergen foods to decrease the potential allergies in the kids later. And the thing with that too is that it also has to be not just introduced, but repeated. So it has to be something that you don't just give one time and be like, okay, well, he tried, a little bit of thinned out peanut butter mixed with some yogurt. And so he's fine. He'll never have a peanut allergy. Like, no, you have to keep increasing their exposure. That's really, really key in what we're finding to help decrease these potential food allergens later.
Yeah. And I just want to piggyback on that, because that whole repeated exposure for the dietary pattern that you're trying to establish, it goes for all the other foods too. If you're introducing beef in that second 6 months of life, you want to establish that routinely as part of the dietary pattern, as well as fruits and vegetables and whole grains. It's not just a one-time introduction. Oh, I tried this food, let's move on to the next. We want to, we don't want to get too repetitive with our foods, but we want to have wide dietary patterns so that there are lots of different foods within each category of food group, and that kids are seeing lots of different nutrient-rich foods during this time frame.
Yeah. And I don't remember if it was this day or not, but I'm going to throw it in anyway, that, we also talk about that the importance of repeating those foods is because, maybe the baby spits it out the first time. And it takes sometimes repetition with that just for babies to understand, like, oh, I do actually like this flavor, or I'll accept this flavor. Maybe it's not my favorite. Maybe I like strawberries more, but I can learn how to eat blueberries fine, and it takes, numerous attempts by parents, and they have to be really encouraged by that because, giving, a kind of the stink eye face back to the parents and spitting it out and making bad faces, it can be very hard for the parent then to want to try that, another 5 to 10 times, but that's really what needs to happen so that you can help set your baby up for success later on when you find yourself at 2 to 4 years of age, really finding that picky eater stage. The repetition of the food introduction has so many reasons behind it.
I know we're getting off a little on a tangent here, but I do want to piggyback on that. There was one researcher or presenter, and I'm lost on her name, but she said that, and I think it was Susan Johnson actually, as I think about it, but she said that stink eye that you get from your baby, like that when you introduce a new food to your baby and he pulls back and he makes a face like ew, and he might even gag. Her research showed that if you then offer another bite of that same food, babies will take it. Like that negative initial reaction isn't necessarily negative. Do you remember her talking about that?
Yes, I do. That was so fascinating to me too, because it's so contrary to how we operate as humans. Like somebody gives us a negative response, then I don't want to go back and do the same thing again. I might get the negative response back to me. But she says, to overcome that and keep trying it. And immediately after she has seen, I'm sure it doesn't always happen, but the fact that it does sometimes happen is just the encouragement that we need for our parents to be able to just, stick through this and you can get this.
Yes, exactly. So just to kind of recap day one, it really was focused on why are the early years so important. A nutrient-rich diet is something that we want all parents to begin with when they introduce complementary foods, and we want them to stay consistent with it through the years. We want to establish that wide food pattern, that healthy dietary pattern as much as we can, and we want to focus on irons and other critical nutrients in foods. So the second day kind of took us into focusing on nutrient gaps and solving them. Like, how can we solve that iron gap? How can we close that B12 gap, that zinc gap, for example? And it also focused on how moms can change their thinking and their sort of approach to feeding their baby. So what were the highlights for you in that second day?
So again, kind of another little light bulb moment for me. Even though I know already the important benefits of adding beef to a baby's diet when it comes to zinc, iron, and B12 and how critical that is and everything we've been talking about. But I've never, really thought about, in a more practical sense. And when it was brought up on day 2, that just like 1 to 2 ounces of meat. And then I took that and was like, okay, what does that really look like? Okay, well, that's really just a couple of bites of a pureed beef product. That's just a couple of bites, or that's just like a small meatball. Like when I think of, like a meat, so that's like a small meatball, just one of those a day, like something like that to put it into perspective of like, what are we really talking about when we talk about the quantity of animal sources and the foods that babies need to eat. babies eat so many times during the day. So it seems like just offering those, once or twice a day would be pretty easy to slip in. And so really being able to come down to that, I can give a great nutrient source that's well absorbed by the baby's body, that's going to be utilized for that brain activity. And it's going to be easy. It's just a couple of bites.
Mm-hmm. It's true. And listeners might be wondering, well, like, why are you focusing on beef? Why are you focusing on meats? And the reason why we are is because it hits a lot of the highlights that babies need in one, as you mentioned, Kelly, in 1 ounce. We're hitting iron, we're hitting protein, we're hitting zinc, we're hitting vitamin B12. And so a little bit goes a long way towards nourishing the brain and the body of that small child. One of the speakers
It's that little, make every little bite count,
Yes.
so that we can get so much out of just one little bite. And we know that kids aren't even introduced to beef until more closer to 9 or almost about a year of age in the United States. And so by kind of putting a little bit more emphasis on the knowledge of this through practitioners and our families, I think we can kind of shift it down to where it is a part where, the baby actually has great needs for it.
One of the presenters also talked about milk and eggs as also essential foods to add to the eating pattern of young children because, again, of the calcium and the vitamin D and the other nutrients that are really important in this early stage of life.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the stats that she said, I was like, what? One of the presenters said, infants need 9 times more iron than grown men.
Right?
9 times more iron. What?
Than a grown man.
I know. I was like, wow.
And it really has to do with the speed that they're growing. A grown man is not growing anymore. He's grown.
Right.
But the speed that baby is growing, that it's fascinating. Yeah, that was incredible. Another thing that I really enjoyed hearing about was earlier on day 2, also from the speech therapist talking about the different milestones and how we think about milestones for babies of like crawling and sitting up and standing and walking and like these other motor skills milestones. But one thing that she brought up that I just really hadn't thought very much about was other motor milestones of like being able to drink out of an open cup and when they're able to grasp and hold the spoon and put that into their mouths. And like there's actual age components with that of like by this age, your baby should be able to, grasp the spoon and get it into their mouth for the most part.
Right.
And then focus on like even that motor control and lip closure around the spoon. And how she talked about that those muscles have to be developed in order to do that. I thought all of that was so fascinating. What did you think about that?
Oh, I thought it was great too. I mean, there was quite a bit of an emphasis on the feeding and getting baby to be independent with self-feeding and how you connect. And you can do that with the spoon or you can do that with baby-led weaning. And I think we'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah, I think the milestones are not just crawling, standing, walking. There are a lot of milestones around eating. And I think that we don't pay a lot of attention to that. And because we don't, I don't know if you notice this. What I've noticed is that, there's delays in a lot of parents are delaying starting solids or they're delaying advancing the texture of solids, and babies get quite disinterested in eating when they are held back. That's my professional experience is that so many of these babies I've worked with over the years who are, 7 months, 8 months, haven't started solids yet, or 14 months still eating pureed foods. They're very disinterested and they don't eat well. They don't grow well. They might not gain very well. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with the fact that we're not staying ahead of the developmental aspect, these milestones that tell us what to expect along the way. And as a parent, we need to be aware of those milestones so that we are helping our babies achieve them and move forward.
I think you're so right, especially about the not advancing the textures. And I think that's also true of, a lot of times they're not sure what's safe or I don't want to provide a choking hazard to the child. So they're kind of worried about that. They also like to, well, if I can be more in control of this spoon, then I can make sure that it will go into the child's mouth and not end up on the floor and not make a huge mess. And I don't have to bathe the child down after every meal opportunity, and the parent is exerting more control than they should, which also reminds me about one of the other speakers talking about what are those roles of responsibility.
Yes.
And, I thought that was, such a really great, it's so clear in that the adult, the parent decides what the baby is to eat, because of course they're the ones going to the grocery store or whatever, and they're procuring it. When does it happen and where does it happen? But then the child, whether they're the 6-month-old who's just starting solids or the picky 2 to 4-year-old, or, even an older child, is going to determine if they're going to eat it and how much they're going to eat of it. So I think sticking to those boundaries of responsibility, that can be really challenging, but also freeing at the same time when you understand, nope, it's not my decision if the baby's going to eat this or not. It's my choice of whether I'm going to offer to him again. And, hopefully that can, sit with our parents a little bit to be like, oh, okay, I can let go of some of these things and not have that control over spoon feeding so much, so long to where the baby doesn't have their own independence in eating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's Satter's division of responsibility, the whole what the child does and what the parent determines. And it's really based in that trust. And I talk about this a lot on the podcast, so my listeners know this, but you have to trust your child, that your child will learn how to eat. They will learn how to regulate their appetite. They will learn how to self-feed. They are really good moderators of their bodies, and they're born with this intensive sense of how much to eat. I mean, if you nursed a baby before, you can't force feed a baby who's nursing. That baby will pull off and not want to eat anymore. But somewhere along the line, and you mentioned this control over feeding, we get into that problem of trying to take over what our babies eat and how much they eat, and it never ends well. It just never ends well. So we do need to help get that trust back that, our babies do know how to eat. Let's talk a little bit about baby-led weaning, because there was quite a bit of focus on that in terms of the practical aspects of feeding in those early years. The traditional method has always been the spoon, but we have this new age method now of baby-led weaning, and there's quite a bit of research that's come out about it in terms of, around choking incidences, and do babies really get the actual nutrients that they require with this approach? Is their weight okay? There's a lot of questions around it, and we had some fabulous speakers and presenters talk about this topic. What did you find insightful from them?
Sure. So to me, so baby-led weaning is a great new method of feeding your baby. And I just wish the name was, I struggle with the name because it's for parents who may not know, it's more of baby self-feeding is I think a more descriptive of way of describing it. Yes, they are weaning because they are introducing these new complementary foods at the same time. So I understand where the name comes from. But for our parents to visualize what this means, it's really more about, instead of putting purees in front of the baby, which my light bulb moment will be about how the combination of these things happen together. But really more focusing on offering babies larger pieces of food that they can just grasp with their whole hand and even palm it, basically, to, everything from a little chicken drumstick to large pieces of broccoli or large slices of avocado and large slices of bell pepper that are softly cooked, large pieces that they can kind of just gum on, basically, because they don't have teeth at this point, or, enough teeth to really chew it. So it's really a process of them just kind of gumming on the food and sucking out juices and experiencing those flavors and textures in particular, and really being exposed to a lot of different foods in that way. And then some of it does get down into their tummies, yes. And I think the parents that we might be more concerned about is enough getting down into their stomachs? Is there enough, well, we can monitor that with their growth, because if they're growing well, then that means that they are getting enough calories and nutrients. We can also see, like, are they still cranky, 5 minutes after you finish with that? Well, then they might still be a little hungry, or are they hungry before the next, mealtime might be, then maybe they might need a little extra snack or something in between. There's a lot of ways to incorporate that. With even purees, I had kind of thought, well, baby-led weaning is skipping the purees. That's something I had heard before when it had been explained to me. But what they really talked about was it can include purees. How that looks like would be for the parent to preload a spoon with a pureed product on it, and then put that down and let the baby pick it up and feed themselves from that. And so you're using all of those skills for the baby and developing all of those things, and yet you could still use a pureed product. And the other thing too was a light bulb moment, because one of the speakers said, remember, pureed is also a texture. And we still as adults eat pureed foods in a sense, pretty sure that the pumpkin cheesecake I'm going to eat at Thanksgiving is very similar in that, puree kind of texture and consistency, so even as adults, we enjoy things that we may not think of as puree, but they have that still texture that we want our babies and children to enjoy and accept all textures. So
Yes.
Don't just leave an entire texture off the table, so to speak, but incorporate that as well, but using a preloaded spoon to do it. I thought that was fascinating.
Yes, I have always been an advocate of that hybrid method, using both the spoon and baby-led weaning, just because some babies are slower to develop. They're not always going to get what they need out of, with a baby-led weaning approach, just because of their developmental readiness, or they might be slow to advance and get what they need to get. So I've always been like, do both, just be responsive with that spoon. Like they were talking about, preload the spoon, let the baby hold it and put it in their mouths. And not only I think the other thing that came through with the baby-led weaning conversations was that the evidence shows that there is no higher risk of choking. That's a big fear of parents. Then they really teased out the difference between gagging and choking. And gagging is loud. You can see and hear a child gag, and that's very normal when you're learning to eat. I think that they really emphasize that gagging is normal when you're learning to eat. But choking, when parents are educated about the types of foods to offer with baby-led weaning and how to offer them, they really do learn, the best approach in terms of food choices for this feeding method. The incidence of choking is much less. And equally so, when parents learn or are educated about those nutrient-rich foods to offer using the baby-led weaning approach, they do a better job of hitting those nutrients that we talked about earlier in the show, iron, zinc, B12. They do a better job of hitting those nutrients that the baby needs so well.
So great. They showed on the conference a couple of videos, which I thought was so helpful. They really emphasize the parent not freaking out when the child gagged, and the parent being empowered to recognize differences between choking and gagging. And you can see a video of a baby kind of gagging on something, and the parent is right there, but they don't react negatively. And the baby just recovers and learns how to recover. And then they go back for the same bite of the same food. They go back again like they did. They learned how to gag and recover, and that it wasn't a problem with that food, and that I will never eat green peas again, and that they were able to recover so well. And the visual of that was wonderful.
Yeah, you're right. And when we say the parent was right there and not reacting, meaning that they weren't like moving in to rescue that child from gagging.
Exactly.
They really they were there and waiting for that baby to figure out what to do when you gag, and that's part of learning to eat. If you're moving from liquids to solids, you do need to learn how to control that thicker texture in your mouth. And again, I think it was Dawn Winkleman, who is she's a speech language pathologist and the founder of Easy Peasy mats and other baby feeding products. She was very good at showing us, how all those muscles in the mouth work and the throat and how you progress from liquid diet to a more complex diet, and that food introduction and eating is just as much about nutrition as it is those developmental milestones that we've been talking about.
Yeah, I loved how she put those things together, all in one perfect little package, like you said.
Yes.
So, it's all connected and it's all meaningful.
This podcast episode is in partnership with Beef. It's What's for Dinner, a contractor to the Beef Checkoff. Beef is a delicious tasting protein powerhouse. I've personally been a fan of beef since I was a young girl growing up in Indiana. It was the highlight of every birthday meal for me, and I carried on this tradition with my own kids. But when it does come to our kids, especially our young ones, the protein, iron, zinc, choline, and B vitamins in beef help ensure they start life strong, building healthy bodies and brains. There's no other protein food that delivers the same nutrient-rich package in a 3-ounce cooked serving. As we move through this conference, let's move into day number 3, which really focused on market research into parents and how they're thinking and why they make their feeding and food decisions. Very interesting research presented here. One of the things that I thought was really enlightening was looking at, how parents make decisions about food. And top of mind for parents is nutritional value of the food they're offering their children, which I think is very encouraging. I think, what this said to me was that parents are very concerned about the nutritional quality of the foods that they are offering their young children, but they are also balancing that with what their child will eat, what their food preferences are. So I thought that was interesting. There were some other highlights from that morning session. What was interesting for you, Kelly?
I think also just it was fun to hear the parents talking about releasing the plan. Like they had a plan and, that sometimes you just have to let it go and that every baby is different. And there's, if there's other children in the family that are taking time and attention as well, balancing the convenience of that food with the nutrition of, well, we're going to be out and running errands. And so how can I prepare and plan ahead for what my kid's going to eat and to choose something on the go that I know that my baby's going to eat so that we can get through the day and just get out of the, grocery store, get out of Target and make it back home in one piece. Yes, it was fantastic to hear that nutrition is kind of the foundational factor. And yet it is such a balancing act with all of that, with the compassion of dealing with stress, with the convenience, with hearing from other family members and from food bloggers and other parents on Facebook, what you should be doing. And at some point, just letting it all go.
Yeah. I remember Mike presented and said, parents are like mouth wide open with a fire hose coming at them with information and what they should do and what they should not do. And it is so overwhelming. It's exciting to start solids, but it is so overwhelming. And there's a lot to siphon through. And the worries are real, from choking to gagging to food allergies to food waste. Is my child getting enough nutrition? My child's not eating. It's just, there's so much fear and unknown. And in fact, there were a couple of statistics, Kelly, I thought was really eye-opening. Number one, 58% of parents in this market that was conducted, 58% of parents said that starting solids was completely overwhelming for them. And they looked to Facebook and their partners and their own parents and the pediatrician to get information. I thought that was really enlightening. The other statistic that came out was that 40% of new moms are depressed and anxious. And so I think there's a lot of room there to, as a healthcare provider, to really be empathetic to the whole first year of nutrition and feeding. And I think that if you're out there and you're a professional who works with young children, to just really hone in and get in connection with the fact that parents are struggling and it's not an easy. They might show you on the outside they're excited and this is great, but there's a lot of hidden fears on the inside. And I think that we have to all be a little bit more empathetic to the process in that first year and less judgmental and more supportive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that by supporting the parent, you're supporting the child. So it's that partnership with them, and it's helping to build that trust in that relationship so that they know that they can be honest with you about these fears, about discipline and food waste and choking and gagging, and come to the right sources for information about that.
And that's a great opportunity for healthcare providers like ourselves. And we did have real parents tell real stories about what their own experiences were. We had one dietitian who had a premature infant who told us about her experience and what it was like to feed a preemie baby, and talk about completely turning your own, well thought out plan. And we know dietitians out there, they think out the plan to a T. I know I always do.
Absolutely.
But, just really talk about, and you work with preemies, so I'm really interested in your comments on this, but talk about turning something completely, your plan for your newborn baby is completely turned upside down when you have a premature infant. What are you thinking about that? And what have your experiences been as a neonatal dietitian around that?
So I was so excited to hear this parent and dietitian talking about her premature baby. I worked in the neonatal ICU as a dietitian for about 20 years as a dietitian at the bedside, and then also doing research on preemies and nutrition and how to feed them better. And her story is honestly so very typical. When you have a preemie baby, then everything is different. Even all of our recommendations about nutrient intakes are just for term babies. They're for basically a healthy, nice, chunky term baby that came out at about 7 pounds, give or take.
Yeah.
Some of my patients in the NICU, they were born at 1.5 to 2 pounds, so there's a big difference in that. One thing that she talked about too, which was so important, was really letting go of her preconceived ideas and focusing on, what can her individual baby do? Because preemies often have digestive issues because their guts are born too early too. Their guts are premature. Everything is premature. So if they've been born too early, they often have underdeveloped lungs because their lungs are not born at a term lung strength. And so a lot of times these babies have, one organ system impacts another, because they were all born premature, so not being strong enough to breastfeed is very typical. And that the babies, they often get tuckered out really quickly when they're learning how to breastfeed or sometimes even bottle feed. So we have to tube feed them a lot to get that calories and nutrients into their tummies, and so all of that does extend. And one thing that she talked a little bit about that I saw a lot was parents trying to figure out, okay, if it says that typically babies should be starting solids at 6 months, well, if my baby was born a month early, does that mean that they won't start solids? I shouldn't start until 7 months of age because then there'd be 6 months corrected age. And what if my baby was born 2 months early? Are they going to be 2 months delayed? And they start to think in sometimes some negative feelings of that delay, and to think well, now my baby's not going to start solids till they're 8 months of age or something. Well, don't think of it as a delay, and don't even think of it as that an 8 months and that they're slow to get there. It's because they arrived too early. And so being more cognizant of what the baby's developmental skills are showing you of when they're ready for you, and meeting that baby where they are, and recognizing that we're going to shift some of these age markers because your baby at 6 months is really only acting like a 4-month-old because of their developmental issues. So, and not even developmental delay or anything, just the fact that they were born premature. So we've got to give them time to catch up. And you can imagine, we've talked about how fast a regular term baby is growing during this first 2 years of life. That is even more so with a premature baby. So they have even more growth happening and to support all of that. So it was so touching to hear her story and the success that she finally got to with feeling like that she could have, this list of foods that her baby would eat. And as the list grew, her confidence grew as well. And just seeing that success in her, and she talked about how it was messy. It was messy emotionally and physically and everything in between. But she did get to a place of success. And that's what we want to get. We want to support our families, support our parents, support the babies, and get to a place of success.
That was Chrissy Brissett when she talked about making a list of the foods that her child had tried. And as that list grew, she got more confident. I use that approach for some of my families who are dealing with a picky eater because they get really down in the dumps and they feel like it's never going to change. But if you keep a running list, and actually that can be really empowering for the child too. It can also be a negative thing if it feels like pressure to the child. But keeping that running list of we tried this food, we tried this food, we tried this food can really build confidence. And I don't think it's a bad idea for parents who are really concerned about building that wide eating pattern and really focusing on food exposure and repeated exposure. I don't think it's a bad idea to use like a list like that too, to help you build confidence and help you actually navigate where you need to go. If you've got a list where you've only tried 3 protein foods, you need to start paying more attention to protein foods, for example.
I think it's great because a list like that is helpful for us in all types of our areas of life. So why wouldn't it work for food as well? Like if I have a list of, okay, today I walked half a mile, and then the next day I walked a little bit more than that, and the next day I walked a little bit more than that, and I can look back on that and see those goals achieved, then that gives me such confidence and success to continue to move forward. And, you can talk about like all kinds of areas of our life where having a written list in front of your face to look at of like, no, I have accomplished these things and I can keep going. It's such a stimulus to us to help with success.
Yeah, I agree. It's empowering. All right, let's talk
empowering.
The last day is all about innovations in food and feeding development. Let's talk about that a little bit because I know you were more intimately involved with that day. We talked about Beef 101. We talked about, what are the ways that are very practical for families to use beef in the first year. We talked about cultural and ethnic offerings of beef in terms of food innovation and even just food innovation in general. What were some of the highlights for you from that day?
I think definitely one of the highlights was a focus on let's talk about and explore global flavors, and that needs to be visible in the baby foods aisle at the grocery store, much more so than what it is right now. And hearing from our speaker there, talking about the innovations in the market when it comes to baby foods and how the story has partly started with even the pediatric electrolytes, like when your child is sick and you want to kind of make sure that they're getting enough of their electrolytes to keep them hydrated, and that they've shifted. And in certain markets, they've even introduced new flavors of that. So instead of them being like the typical flavors, they're introducing more culturally appropriate flavors that families really spark up and relate to. And when they see something on the shelf that's like a pediatric electrolyte that is mango flavor and horchata flavored and something that speaks to their culture, then they really feel heard, and that we need to get there with more of our other baby food products. That might be more of the baby food products that are mixed foods instead of single foods, like where you just have like pureed beef or pureed chicken or pureed ham. There's not a lot you can do with that.
Right.
But once we get into more mixed foods, instead of having our traditional beef and gravy or beef and potatoes and ham and applesauce, kind of these traditional mixtures of combinations, yes, that those can be expanded quite a lot. Really empowering families. Like if you're not seeing that in the grocery store, then speak up And make sure that you are doing that at your home, because you're already cooking and preparing and getting food to go. That is what your cultural sensitivities are that you want to eat. Like, what is your cultural representation and heritage? That's what you should also be feeding your baby, of course. That's what you want to be feeding your baby, so that they recognize these flavors and textures and spices and seasonings and combinations and the practical ways of, okay, just take your meal and break it down, break it into the texture consistency that's appropriate for the age of your baby, and moving that along, like as we've talked about, don't just get stuck in one texture, but providing that to your baby. I thought really the conversation all about meeting the global foods mouthful for a baby was very exciting and encouraging.
Mm-hmm. I think we will see a lot of innovation come. Even though we've seen a lot already, I think we will see a lot more in the future. And this area of meat is a challenging area in the baby food aisle for lots of families, because there's one option, right? There's one option for the most part that's straight up pureed meats, or you get into the combination. But, there's also this whole area of you can make these foods at home. And we did have a speaker talk with us about, the different cuts of meat and using ground beef and some guidelines around how to make meats at home for your baby, whether you're spoon feeding or you're using baby-led weaning approaches or you're doing a hybrid combination approach. What were some of the things that, you took away from that conversation?
I really liked how she talked about using cuts of beef that are inherently tender already, because that's going to, especially for a baby that's using baby-led weaning, where they're going to be trying to gum it or even chew it a little bit, already having something that's nice and tender is setting yourself up for that success. So using things done in a slow cooker or braised in your oven, but something like a nice tender roast that just shreds apart very easily can be very tender for a baby to be able to chew and eat and swallow safely. And then talking about how even ground beef, it's a very affordable cut. It's a very affordable piece of meat that you can choose. It's pretty fast to just brown off in the skillet and just toss either into either of a blender if you have that, a potato masher, or even forks where you can just really get it down to a texture that the baby can use, adding a little bit of breast milk or formula to thin it down to different textures, and the flexibility of beef to be able to meet those nutrient gaps that we've been talking about, but in a way that you can set it up to be the right texture and consistency so that the baby will be successful. Mm-hmm. I really loved all of that she had to say.
Yeah, I did too. It sort of made me think, why didn't I ever just brown up ground beef and mix it with some of the oatmeal cereal I was giving my infants, or why didn't I make my own puree, which is really pretty simple, right?
Right.
Using broth or using breast milk or infant formula, depending on the age of your baby. And so I think that it really opened my eyes up to the versatility of beef in that first year of life, because I think what you see in social media is just, a lot of babies with a huge hunk of steak in their hand, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that can be a barrier for parents when they see that, for using this approach to feeding their baby, because they look at that big chunk of meat and all they can see is choking. But there's a lot of different ways that you can prepare beef that would be texturally and developmentally appropriate for your infant. So I thought that was a good talk. Just to wrap this up, because we're, dove deep into this, Kelly. I hope if you're a parent out there listening that you got some good new ideas. But I guess let's talk about, the overarching hopes that we have for parents out there around this topic of eating in the early years. What key takeaways do you want parents to walk away from after they listen to this show?
We all know that it's exciting when babies start new foods and they progress through that. And at the same time, as exciting as it is equally overwhelming and stressful. And that healthcare providers understand that. And we understand where parents are coming from with that. We understand that the parents have fears around all of those, which are very valid. And yet at the same time, we do have great tools to help parents through this time. Importantly, to meet the baby's nutritional needs for growth and for brain development, and that a product like beef offers a lot of flexibility in textures that you can provide to the baby, a lot of seasonings that you add to make it culturally relevant to your household and what the rest of your family is eating, and that there are ways to include products like that in the early time period of 6 to 9 to 12 months of age. Starting earlier is better for not just beef to meet iron, zinc, and B12 needs, but also other foods like we've talked about with fish and eggs and nuts and other dairy products, so that you can help decrease the risk of potential food allergies later on. So all an exciting opportunity, and it is going to get messy, and embrace the messiness as much as you can. And it's okay to embrace a little convenience at other times too. And it's all a balancing act. Do what's best for your family and what works with you. But even just a few bites or a small meatball size of ground beef can meet those needs, and you can be successful in setting up your kid for great, healthy eating habits for the rest of their life.
Awesome. Well said. Big nutrition, little tummies, every little bite counts, right?
Yes. Thanks for compacting everything I just said into those. Yes. No, that's a perfect way. That's a perfect way. Like, I could talk about this forever, but yes, thank you for tiny tummies, and every little bite counts.
Absolutely. Kelly, you've been so awesome to come on the show. Tell people where they can find you if they want to get in contact with you.
Sure, absolutely. You can find me through the University of Texas at Austin website at the Dell Medical School. Contact information and email is all listed on there. And you can also follow me on Instagram at Kelly Hawthorne. And I would love to share with you all of the fun things that is going on with my life and fun nutrition related things. I also have been posting a lot of things from my cattle ranch this year, because that's where I have been hanging out during the pandemic for the most part. And so there's lots of fun cow pictures as well.
And you're quite the cook. I want to say griller, but I mean, I don't want to imply that you only grill, because I know you have like a smoker and you have a grill, and I enjoy watching all the yummy food.
I got the smoker at the end of last year, so I've really been enjoying that.
Well, I appreciate all of your help and insight with this show, and just appreciate you coming on the Nourish Child podcast.
Thanks so much, Jill.
Well, that was fun to relive that amazing 4-day conference called Eating in the Early Years, which was put on by the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. I hope you found this cutting-edge research and information about early childhood nutrition useful. I personally really enjoyed working with Kelly and the team of researchers and scientists in this learning opportunity. If you are a nutrition professional listening to this show, you might be interested in knowing that you can still listen to the recorded conference. You can go to my show notes at jillcastle.com/121 for the link to enroll. And there is also a link that will take you to the different illustrations that were created to summarize the research and findings during this 4-day event. If you want to take a look at those or download them for yourself, because they are free to download, you can go to the link in my show notes and get right to that page. So, if you like The Nourished Child, go ahead and be sure to give it a thumbs up and a review wherever you listen to podcasts, and feel free to drop me a line with topic suggestions and feedback. I do love to hear from you. You can also join my Facebook page, The Nourished Child, and connect with me there. Last, I want to thank Beef It's What's for Dinner, a contractor to the Beef Checkoff, for partnering with me to create this episode. I hope above all you've learned that iron and zinc have been identified as critically important in supporting proper growth and development of infants and young kids. Beef supplies both of these nutrients, which helps ensure young children start life strong, building healthy bodies and brains. As always, thank you for joining me today. Have a wonderful week. Stay healthy, love on your loved ones, and most importantly, don't forget to give that baby in your life a loving squeeze today. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Nourish Child podcast, where the #1 goal is to help you grow a nourished child inside and out.